Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are right at the top of the hour and it's a uh, full agenda. So I think we can dive in and we'll continue letting folks in on our end. But Sam, can I pass it to you?
All right, thanks so much, Erica. Welcome, everybody. This is, I believe, the third working group meeting for the second statewide agricultural expert panel of the State Water Resources Control Board on November 14th, 2025. Really appreciate everyone taking time out of their Friday afternoon to join us. I think Erica already mentioned it, but we have a packed agenda today. Before we get started, I wanted to run through some language interpretation information for everybody's consideration here. The meeting will be simulcast in Spanish, and I would just note it's a little bit different than normal. We would ask that everybody, in just a moment, click on that interpretation globe icon at the bottom of your screen on your Zoom controls. In order to hear any public comment that may be interpreted live in Spanish to English, everybody has to select one of the languages in interpretation. If you are primarily an English speaker, please select English. If you would like to hear the meeting in Spanish, please select that. I'll hand it over to Jasmine in just a moment to run through these instructions in Spanish. And I would just note, if you're listening in Spanish, make sure to click mute original audio. If you don't select one of those languages when the option is provided, you won't be able to hear comments that are interpreted live if they're delivered in Spanish to English. So just a quick note there. And by all means, feel free to get in touch with staff if you're having any trouble finding that. At this point, I want to go ahead and hand it over to Jasmine to run through the same information in Spanish. Jasmine.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. Nada más queríamos avisarles que tenemos la interpretación disponible para hoy. Queremos pedirle a todos que para escuchar la reunión y que en español puede seleccionar el icono del globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de la pantalla que dice interpretación. Luego puedes seleccionar el español para poder escuchar la interpretación de la reunión, los comentarios y cualquier pregunta que se haga. Muchísimas gracias. Back to you, Sam.
Gracias, Jasmine. All right, so with that, I do invite everybody to select one of those languages. Again, click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen, and you will be sent to either the Spanish or English channel, depending on your selection. With that, let me go ahead and move on to opening remarks. Before we do a run through of the agenda, I would love to get some opening remarks first from Karen Mogus at the State Water Resources Control Board, and then your panel chair, Dr. Daniel Geisler. Karen.
Thank you. I'm going to keep my remarks brief because we have a lot to get through today. Just want to again thank the panel for your time and your thoughtful deliberations, and I really look forward to hearing more today. I want to reiterate that there's a lot of attention being paid to what this panel is deliberating on, and there will be lots of attention paid to the final report, and wanted to recognize that you are all obviously very dedicated to providing technically sound recommendations for us to proceed with our programmatic planning moving forward, and really appreciate that. And we've put together, by all accounts, on all sides of the stakeholder spectrum, a really excellent panel of folks. And so just really wanted to recognize that and appreciate all of your time, because you don't, those of you with such expertise don't have extra time in your schedules to dedicate. So it's very much appreciated. I also want to recognize that we've asked you to do a lot of stuff in a very short time frame, and you're attending these meetings, many meetings we've already had, many more to come, and want you to know that we will do our best to support you to get to a final product in a timely fashion, but don't want to make you feel that that you don't have time to really come to a consensus of recommendations that you can't all get behind. And so just wanted to recognize that, and we'll definitely be working with Chair Geisler on the schedule and providing as much support as we can from staff's side. So with that, I look forward very much to the conversation today, and I'll probably talk to you at the end of the day at 6 as well. So thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Karen. Dr. Geisler, anything you'd like to share with the group before we do a quick review of the agenda?
Good afternoon, and thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you, Sam, and the Water Board team for organizing today's meeting. And it will be interesting. I'm sure it will be interesting. Thanks.
Great. And I do want to recognize we have at least one member from the State Water Board joining us today. Board member Laurel Firestone is on the line as well. Thank you for joining, Member Firestone. All right. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the agenda before we jump into it here. Really, these working groups are set up to facilitate the expert panel's deliberations on the panel charge questions. That's the primary thing that we're going to be covering throughout the day. And when I get to it in just a moment, I'll explain a little bit about how we see that going. In just a moment, we are going to switch gears, though, and have one of the panel's many requested presentations for a discussion with the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board on, among other things, the CV SWAT model and some of the perceived protectiveness of various irrigated lands measures that have been taken over the last several years. That presentation will be delivered by Adam Laputz from the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, Eric Warren from the Regional Board, Tess Dunham, and Ken Miller from Formation Environmental. I really appreciate them all being here today. I would ask panelists, I know that early on we had said that there would likely be a lot of time for dialogue and back and forth with the presenters, but we really need to get to the discussion of your charge questions as quickly as possible. So at Daniel's request, I will be kind of keeping time and moving folks through that conversation as quickly as possible. If you have follow-up questions for any of the presenters, please jot those down. Feel free to send those to us, and we'll do our best to get you an answer as soon as we can, again, on the materials that will be presented by that team in just a moment here. At 3:45, we're going to transition over to discussion of the panel charge questions, beginning with continued discussion of questions 1 and 2, and many thanks in particular to panel members Hannah Waterhouse from UC Santa Cruz and Richard Smith from UC A&R to walk through some of the revisions that have been made to their draft document, and then also provide an opportunity for panelists to provide additional revisions or ask clarifying questions on the document. The new thing on the docket for today is a very quick discussion of panel questions 3, 4, and 5. And staff, please feel free to jump in if I misstate something. But once we get to a discussion, around those new questions, we're really looking for kind of a popcorn style discussion among the panelists. That is, just your initial quick thoughts on each one of them, and then we'll move on to the next one. The goal here is to give the author teams, the 2-person author teams for each one of those questions, an opportunity to hear a little bit from the panel just to get them started on the development of their drafts. You will have more opportunities in the very near future to get into a more in-depth discussion of each one of those questions. But I just wanted to kind of frame that up before we get to the latter half of the agenda today. As always, we will wrap the panel discussion around 5:40 or so for a round of public comment. If you are interested in providing public comment, I'll just scroll back. You are welcome to send a request to that email address that you see on the bottom of the screen, dwq-ilrp@waterboards.ca.gov. Alternatively, once we get to public comment, you can also use the hand raise feature, and I'll run through instructions on how to do that once we get to it. But you can find that hand raise feature at the bottom of your screen on the reactions button, and then select hand raise. The public comment session is limited. Again, these working group meetings are really more of an opportunity for the panelists to deliberate with each other on the questions themselves. So that's what I have for you in terms of an introduction. I do want to recognize the other panelists that are joining us here today, and hopefully I get everybody. Just in the interest of time, I'll read your name off. We are joined by panelists Ali Montazar, Hannah Waterhouse, Richard Smith, Michael Kahn, Thomas Harder, Godu Atume, Chair Daniel Geisler, and and Ruth Dahlquist Willard. Hopefully I got everybody. I know the list is quite long. If I missed your name, if you wouldn't mind just hitting that hand raise button real quickly, that would be wonderful. But thank you all for your continued participation. In the interest of time and wanting to stick to the agenda, we'll go ahead and start the presentation up. For all of the presenters, you have been named a co-host, so you can mute and unmute yourselves. Just ask for next slide when you would like me to advance it. But with that, I'll turn it over to the team. And Adam Laputz, I think you were going to kick things off with some contextualizing remarks. Is that accurate?
I'm trying to, oh, there we go. I'm up and running here. No, actually, you know what? I think what we're going to do is we're going to start with Eric's presentation and then move in from there. And no, just thanks for the time.
Wonderful. Thanks, Adam. All right, let's go ahead and turn it over to Eric Warren then. Eric, take it away.
Great. I'll dive right in it and try to keep it short, keep us on time. I'm sure Ken's piece is much more interesting to listen to anyways. So good afternoon, members of the panel. My name is Eric Warren. I am the program manager for the Central Valley Water Board's Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. Based on the last panel meeting, there was some interest in Region 5 data reporting and specifically how this data is used to estimate nitrogen loading and develop targets for our program. So I'll speak to that a little bit. Give me just a second. Next slide, please. So I'll start with a quick walkthrough of the information we collect from growers, provide a high-level summary of how groundwater protection values and targets are used within the region, and then pass it on to Ken Miller, who has a great technical presentation on the modeling process. Lastly, I believe Tess Dunham will provide some additional context around these elements and how they are ultimately implemented in our program. Next slide, please. On the data collection side, growers report information about management practices through our farm evaluation reports, which are submitted every 5 years. This information is supplemented by management practice implementation reports in groundwater quality management plan areas to document the specific practices growers are implementing to address water quality issues. Additionally, growers submit irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary reports on an annual basis. These document key information such as the amount of nitrogen applied through various sources and yield. The coalition submits this field level information to the board by anonymous member ID, by anonymous APN ID, and also aggregated by township. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick view of the irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report template. It collects information for each field, such as crop and crop age, acreage, the various sources of nitrogen applied, and yield. And most coalitions have developed online reporting systems to collect this information, which has greatly reduced the workload associated with paper submittals, and also provides extra QA/QC controls that will prompt growers if they appear to be entering incorrect data. Next slide, please. In addition to the farm evaluations previously mentioned, this form also collects management practice information specific to irrigation and nitrogen efficiency practices. In the interest of time, I won't go through them all, but I can provide a copy of this form to the expert panel to review if it isn't in your information package already. Next slide, please. After the information is submitted to the coalition, it is QA/QC'd and provided to the regional board in 3 distinct tabular formats. The first 2 are both field level data, organized by member and by APN. The third is an aggregated data set showing the totals for each crop within a township. Next slide, please. Question 5 of the panel's charge questions asks, are these tables, as they currently stand, an effective tool for evaluating A and R data? We have found that they are for a number of reasons. They provide staff the ability to assess existing levels of performance for individual crops as well as for specific members and parcels. Also, due to long travel times to groundwater in many of our areas, it is one of the key feedback mechanisms we have to look at in the absence of an immediate measurable groundwater response. Lastly, it can also be used in conjunction with management practice data to evaluate the relationships between management practices and outcomes. Next slide, please. Moving on from data collection, how is this data ultimately used to set targets? For some background, in 2018, the State Board directed Region 5 to develop a methodology for estimating loading from irrigated lands and use that methodology to estimate the loading that would be needed to meet receiving water limits. Next slide, please. To estimate current loading, the coalitions relied on grower-reported data in conjunction with a version of the soil and water assessment tool tailored to the Central Valley. The model allows for estimation of nitrate leaching under a wide range of soil, climate, fertilization, and yield scenarios. But it is important to note that the results are fundamentally tied to the grower summary report data, so there is a real-world basis for each field's leaching estimate. Next slide, please. These values are calculated for each crop year. Shown here are the 2022 results, which indicate many townships currently fall within the 30 to 60 pound per acre range. These loading estimates form the basis for estimating future water quality outcomes. Next slide, please. Moving on to the development of targets, the loading estimates previously mentioned are fed into a steady-state flow simulation model that has been developed for the Central Valley, referred to as CVNP-SAT. This model considers factors such as recharge, pumping, and hydrogeologic conditions, and is essential to creating the connection between loading rates and anticipated groundwater quality outcomes. This allows us to provide actionable and locally relevant target loading rates for growers. Next slide, please. Here's a view of the groundwater protection targets approved in 2023. They will be reassessed every 5 years, ensuring our targets are reflective of the latest available information. The results indicate target loading may be achievable in some areas with modest load reductions. However, there are other non-ILRP dischargers within the valley that contribute to nitrogen loading. So properly accounting for these loads is a key priority in the years to come. Next slide, please. So how do targets ultimately get translated to growers, and how do we ensure adequate progress is made? It's important to emphasize that the program doesn't rely on a single element, such as a groundwater protection targets, in isolation. Progress is ensured through a multifaceted approach, which includes research provided through the Management Practice Evaluation Program, setting relevant performance targets and goals such as the acceptable A/R ranges, and enhanced education and outreach for growers who are not performing up to a reasonable standard. Next slide, please. In summary, we feel that our current approach for developing targets is best suited for Region 5 and is necessary to properly reflect the wide variation of conditions seen across our region. On the topic of limits, we have many examples of success addressing water quality issues without the use of enforceable limits, and we believe this step would be premature without strong indications our current approach is not working. Lastly, I want to highlight the additional measures our region has implemented to protect groundwater users. Through the ILRP and CV salts, domestic wells within the region are actively being sampled, and users in much of the region are being provided access to replacement drinking water while longer-term solutions are developed. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time. I'll now hand it off to Ken Miller, who will provide more detail around the modeling effort in our region. Thank you.
I looked at the list. I don't know that Ken had been promoted to co-host yet, so we may need somebody to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
you should be all
Oh,
set.
here we go. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tess, and for giving me the ability to speak. Okay. Well, good afternoon, expert panel members, members of the state board, everybody else. I'm going to, as best as I can, briefly talk about some key performance metrics in the Central Valley, building on the nice presentation Eric just gave, giving you all a little bit more context, and then once I'm finished, Tess will kind of wrap it up and describe how it all fits together in terms of implementation. So if we go to the next slide, the two metrics that I'll focus on today are specific to the Central Valley Irrigated Lands Program. They are the crop-specific acceptable ranges of applied nitrogen divided by nitrogen removed, or A over R, as well as the groundwater protection values and targets. So we'll describe each of those in a little bit of detail. We'll spend more time talking about the approach that was taken by the Central Valley Coalitions in response to the GWP requirements. And then again, Tess will sort of describe how that all integrates together into a cohesive program. So next slide. So we wanted to highlight this because I think it lines up nicely with some of the panel discussions that have happened so far in terms of assessment approaches, individuals versus collective, et cetera. And so just wanted to highlight sort of existing requirements and the methods that were used to actually come up with some of these numbers. And so starting with the ranges of A over R, they, as Eric described, are crop specific. They do apply to individual growers. They're intended to be, growers are intended to be evaluated over multiple years in terms of their performance. And of course, this is a range, and so there's a lower end and an upper end. And the way that the coalition developed the lower end was really based upon literature and UC guidance. So an optimal sort of scenario, if you will. Something to strive for. And then, in fact, the upper end of the range is actually quite consistent with, I think it was last meeting's discussion where Dr. Daniel Geisler had proposed looking at the INMP data set as reported by growers over multiple years, looking at the distribution of what is currently being achieved and understanding, okay, those that are sort of far off on the end of the distribution in terms of less efficient performance, can they not come back towards where the broader population is able to achieve? And so that method of looking at the INMP data, the distribution, and setting a threshold to strive for is exactly what was done to determine the acceptable ranges. Now, in the case of the values and targets, these are collective. They are township based, so it's not specific to one grower or to one crop. It's the whole picture. And they are load based, so not ratio or efficiency based in that sense. They are load based, derived from A minus R, and we'll talk about how we derive that. They also consider a water balance and other key factors and processes that influence water quality. And so effectively, the value tells us where we're at, and the target tells us where we need to get to in terms of what's required to protect water quality. So this method does estimate what would be needed to protect water quality. And as Eric described, the values can be assessed against the targets and be used to track progress towards those targets over time. So next slide. So this is largely a repeat, so I'm going to go quickly here. We just like to show this schematic because it summarizes things nicely. Again, we've got the formula, the values, targets. This approach was collectively implemented by all 13 coalitions in the Central Valley subject to this provision. And as Eric described, we look at grower reported INMP data and use that to inform a process-based root zone model, CV SWAT. That is the formula. The formula calculates the value. The value is the township-based leaching estimate. And then the target looks at those values in the context of the entire valley, the regional recharge, the post-root zone processes, what's going on in groundwater. It looks at that whole system to understand what amount of loading is acceptable to achieve compliance with the regulations. And when all of these elements have been conditionally approved, and I will mention that in the case of targets, they are to be revised and updated on a 5-year basis. And so we are currently working towards that update, which will be in 2028. So with that, we'll just keep rolling. To the next slide, please. Here we go. Okay, so just wanted to take a moment to talk about why the coalition's opted to take a modeling approach to respond to these requirements. There's several reasons. I'll go through them quickly. But first and foremost, the Central Valley is enormous. It's very heterogeneous, and complex, and so we understand that it's big. It's really hard to measure nitrate leaching in a field, let alone tens of thousands of fields across millions of acres. It's also arguably infeasible to site monitoring wells underneath all of those fields. And in the case of monitoring wells, when you do have observations of water quality, it can be difficult to relay those back to specific sources and/or dischargers. And so it's very helpful for understanding the state of conditions and whether or not it's safe to drink that water. Models help us provide context to actually relate that back to something. And so models, they can consider the local factors that we know impact water quality. We can use them to set locally appropriate goals. So things like climate, soil type, management, hydrogeology, all those things matter when it comes to water quality, and models give us the ability to consider them. We know that A-R, of course, is a good risk indicator. It's a robust metric, but we also know that the nitrogen cycle is more complicated than that. And so A-R alone does not necessarily equal leaching. And so the models can help contextualize that A-R and help us estimate where that nitrogen is going. And then last but certainly not least is when we have models, when we have them set up, they allow us to do a lot of things relatively quickly and relatively easily compared to other alternatives. And so we can look at different management scenarios, different loading scenarios, and we can see how that plays out in terms of water quality out into the future. And as Eric described, many places of the valley, there's a lag time element. And so for us to have a good idea of whether or not performance on the ground is going to have the intended outcome, models really help us illuminate that. And so those are some of the reasons why the modeling tools were selected. So if we go to the next slide, briefly describe why the CV SWAT model was selected, and just advance once more because I accidentally included animations. I meant to get rid of them. Thank you. So why SWAT? There's certainly multiple good models out there that can be used for this type of question of how much nitrate is leaching below a root zone. The reason SWAT was selected was not randomly. It was a thoughtful process, and some of the reasons are outlined here. It's widely used. It's an open source model. Key agencies use it, such as the EPA. Really key is the fact that it's capable of simulating large, complicated watersheds, which the Central Valley is, but it doesn't sacrifice the detail and the physical processes that we know matter for our question at hand here. And so we're able to use SWAT to run the whole Central Valley, but we're still able to run it at the subfield scale and at a daily time step. So it's got a lot of detail. It's got water and nitrogen cycles, gives us that context to A-R and considers those factors. And so CV SWAT, which is the Central Valley adaptation of SWAT, that's been under development since almost 10 years now. And that's been done in collaboration with UC, NRCS, many discussions with regional board staff. And fortunately, we got started with some funding from the NRCS. So next slide. So just some basics to the modeling approach. The ultimate goal here was to define representative management practice suites for specific crops in specific regions of the Central Valley, and then also to calibrate those models to Central Valley conditions. And so key to this was working very closely with Dr. Tim Hartz. He was extraordinarily instrumental in helping us design these management practice suites to calibrate these crop models. If he wasn't aware of the right information, someone in his network was, and so we kind of spread out our information tentacles wide and really drew from sort of a rich knowledge base to develop the CV SWAT model to do these management practices and the crop model calibration. And then specifically for the groundwater protection approach, just want to be clear that when we're modeling, we are considering the sum of all the plant available nitrogen resources reported in the INMPs that Eric just showed. And then something that's, I think, important to flag is that when we estimate leaching for the groundwater protection context, we're taking the long-term average of our model run. So we run the model for 38 years. It warms up for the first 8, and then we take the average of the last 30 years. And the reason we do that is because we understand that, say, for example, nitrate storage in the root zone, that's going to be variable from year to year, right? If you take the long-term average, we're effectively canceling that term out, right? We don't really model a net change in nitrate storage in the root zone. And that may, create some, on an individual year basis, there's a little bit of uncertainty there. But over time, over multiple years, over multiple A's and multiple R's, that kind of thing sort of comes out in the wash. And I do have a slide as backup if we want to get into that. But that is a key thing that we do is we're looking at the long-term averages. We're not modeling stacking up of nitrate in the root zone versus it going somewhere else. So with that, please go to the next slide. I'll go quickly through this. There's 3 steps to the formula and values. We pull our data together. We developed what we call the root zone library, which is a big database of SWAT runs generated through an automation approach that was actually inspired by some of the work that Toby and I think Thomas did for the nitrate hazard index, a model automation approach, and then ultimately using that to calculate our values. So if you just advance through all this, sorry, I didn't get rid of it before, and just go on to the next slide. Thank you. So this is just showing sort of the workflow. On the left-hand side, you can see the Central Valley, all those different colored polygons or different modeling units in SWAT. If we zoom in on a township, you can see again a finer look at those modeling units, which is basically soil mapping units. The black outlines are parcels for which we have INMPs. So if we were to zoom into one of those parcels, we've got a whole range of simulations already done in the root zone library for all the different crop types, for different ranges of N rates and different yields. And so for that parcel, and in this particular example, there's 6 soil types. It's sort of an extreme example, but proving the point that there's 6 different modeling units. And so we pull out 6 different model runs or one for each of those different units. And so that's all informed by the INMP. So the INMP tells us the crop, tells us the total nitrogen applied, and tells us the yield. And so we go in and we find the appropriate match for each, and then roll that up to the parcel and then ultimately up to the township scale. So the requirements are to report at a township scale, but these estimates are actually being derived from sort of subfield based simulations. So next slide. And then as part of the reporting, speaking to the transparency aspect, we do provide these detailed summary tables for each of the townships for which there is a value. And what these townships include is you can see the column with the INMP/NMP, in this case is older, data set. So you can see the total nitrogen applied by growers, the total nitrogen removed as reported by growers. And then right next to that, you can see what was modeled in SWAT, total N applied, total removal, A-R N balance, and you can see how that compares. And then from there, you can also see a breakdown of the total pounds as well as the average pounds per acre of the various nitrogen budget components, the various loss pathways, including nitrate leached, so that the overall balance can be assessed and verified. If you go to the next slide, we do the same thing for the water balance. So total volumes of inputs and outputs of water, as well as the average depths for each. So that's included with each township. So if we go to the next slide. So once we have our values, we then need to put that in the context of the bigger picture, consider all the processes that influence that water quality. And so the targets framework is sort of depicted there in the schematic. We've got a series of steps, a series of things we consider. So looking at the regional hydrology, considering other sources of nitrate, accounting for the post-root zone processes, and then accounting for what's occurring in groundwater and ultimately coming out of groundwater via wells. So water that would be pulled for consumption. And to do that, as Eric said, we use the non-point source assessment tool developed by Dr. Harder and his lab. So if we go to the next slide. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this. You can ask me questions or you can ask Thomas. This is his tool. It's a wonderful tool. It's been amazingly helpful for us to answer this complicated question. I won't go into great detail. The main things I'll focus on right now is just to say that to set targets, we focused on predicted water quality in the domestic wells. And if you look at the right-hand corner there, that's the King Subbasin as an example. All those red dots are domestic wells, so you can get a sense of the coverage in that subbasin. We looked at all of the wells, not only inside of a township, but actually related to a township load. So even if the well was outside of the township, but its source area was in the township, we counted that as well. And so we looked at a population of wells related to a township load to assess the targets. The model is not necessarily accurate at the individual well level, and so it does require us to look at a population, which we did the township. So next slide. This basic flow chart just describes how we set targets, very simplified here. You've got your current loading in a township, you've got variable rates, variable sources. Those are tied to virtual domestic wells. We look at the distribution of water quality in the future as a function of that loading scheme, and then ask the question, does this current loading scheme achieve the water quality objective? If the answer is yes, then the target simply becomes the values, i.e. maintain the status quo. If it is not protective, then we go in and we devise alternative loading scenarios, i.e. iteratively reducing the amount of loading until the point is reached where that loading regime is protective of water quality. And so that basic framework is how we use the tools to set targets. Next slide. And then sort of last but not least, we do have currently a uncertainty validation work plan. This was a condition of the targets approval. So when the regional board said, you know, these targets are approved, there was the condition that the coalitions had to go out and sort of characterize the uncertainty with the various modeling elements, validate and verify the estimations, and ultimately pull all those findings together and lead into an informed targets update in 2028. And so that is something that we are working on now. We're a little bit more than a year in, and all of that information is feeding into that targets update. And so there's a total of 16 activities that have been identified in the work plan, mostly to be done by the coalition and some with our collaborators, i.e. UC, i.e. Thomas. We will need your help, as you know, on some of these. But ultimately, we're looking to, you know, address things with the formula, with the values, and then many things related to the targets. And so that is an ongoing effort intended to continue to improve upon our ability to estimate these targets. So with that, I will then pass it over, I believe, to Tess Dunham at this point.
Thank you. And I know we're getting short on our time, but I did want to kind of then bring it around. So we have this process to model and determine our values and our targets. And then what does that mean in context with respect to the irrigated lands orders within the Central Valley? And there's really two ways that the groundwater protection targets and and even the A over R become integrated into the ILRP orders. One pathway is through what we call our nitrate control program in our priority areas. And then how is it done in the non-priority areas? Eric kind of already touched on the general, which would apply generically in all areas, but there is some more specificity when we get into the nitrate control program in the priority areas. So I'm going to focus on that. Next slide. Most importantly, where are the priority areas, right? What does that mean in context for the nitrate control program? Well, the priority areas are those in orange and red on this map. And we'll get into a little bit more specifics on a couple of the slides. But as you can see, that really is most of the San Joaquin Valley. We have a little bit of an area up in yellow that was a priority area. And then we pretty much have everything south of in San Joaquin County South, other than the exception of the West Side, because West Side is obviously very salty and doesn't have a lot of domestic wells or even public water supply wells. And so the west side area also does not show up under as a priority area just because of the circumstances and probably also some redox conditions within the west side of the valley. But you get a lot of coverage when you talk about the nitrate control program in the South San Joaquin. Next slide, please.
Can I do a quick time check? I don't want to cut you off, but I know we are at time here.
Yeah, I can skip through a couple. Can you give me 2 minutes?
Sure.
Okay. These are just the priority 1 areas. In the subbasins, we'll go to priority 2 map. Next slide. And then we can skip that, go to and you'll have these slides, so you can obviously take a chance and look at them later. The next slide. Actually, go back one, please. And just, Eric mentioned that under the nitrate control program, I think you realize this, but just so you all know, the irrigated lands program, in conjunction with others in the management zone, we are providing drinking water. We are testing wells, and we are providing drinking water at no cost to well users within these priority 1 and priority 2 areas. And just to give you some context, by the end of September of this year, we were providing over 2,000, almost 22 households were receiving free bottled water deliveries through the management zones, as well as we have 7 fill stations that operate where people can bring in their own water and fill it up. Next slide. We'll skip the next slide. And skip that. That's just the dashboard if you ever want to see our metrics. What does this mean then coming into the nitrate control program is we have taken the A over R ranges and these township targets, and we have set milestones. Those milestones are coming into the irrigated lands orders. And actually the first of those for the priority 1 areas is going to happen early in 2026, meaning that becomes a metric for compliance with the nitrate control program. Without meeting those milestones, growers don't get the extended time to comply that we otherwise are given. So the big incentive here is you get additional time before you need to meet nitrate water quality objectives, as long as you are implementing the nitrate reduction program and you are meeting those milestones, which are groundwater protection targets. Next slide. This slide just gives you an idea of what those milestones are. The first one are the milestones related to getting growers within the A over R ratio range that Ken talked about. And the second one is getting the number of townships in order to comply with the groundwater protection targets. And those are going into the ILRP orders. Next slide. And how are we doing this from an outreach approach? The coalitions don't just tell growers like, oh, your township isn't meeting it, you all figure it out. That's not what we do. The coalitions actually have all of the underlying INMP data, and they do specific outreach to growers. If they are an outlier, they contact that grower. If they are in a groundwater protection target and that township is not meeting it, we go in and we talk with those growers in that township. So collectively, ultimately, they will meet the target, but we do individual outreach. It is not just a broad brush. It is a very specific outreach program that talks to all growers verbally, with written materials, one-on-one trainings and workshops. So I think that was my last slide, just trying to give a little bit of flavor on context.
Wonderful. Thank you all for the presentation. I know we're a few minutes behind here. I do want to leave just a few minutes for clarifying questions from any of the panelists. Again, we don't have time to really get into the data. As Tess very correctly said, though, all of these slides will be made available to you following the meeting. And if you do have any questions, perhaps we can follow up with the individual presenters to get you information as needed. Any clarifying questions from our panelists for the presenters? One from Chair Geisler. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question for Eric. In previous meetings, several presenters mentioned that they didn't have access to acreage data. So I was wondering, at the water board, in the summary reports submitted to the water board, is the acreage reported on a field scale? Do you have access to acreage?
In the data reports we receive, no, that information is retained by the coalitions. We do have access to it to the extent, we identify a specific grower that we'd like follow up on, we can get all that information.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Ali.
Thank you for the presentation. I think the modeling you mentioned to me, it seems very beneficial for the complicated large-scale farming of the region. One question I have is about the INMP form. So how do you incorporate the irrigation and nitrogen management efficiency information you have there? I love those information. We always need those information, but I think it's morely perhaps for modeling efforts you do, right? Not for A-R major. So I don't know how you incorporate those information efficiency. Is more for modeling you do, or you use it for any interpretation or incorporation or something?
So I could take a stab at that, Ali. The management practices that are reported on, we don't necessarily model expressly. So if someone says they, schedule their ET or their irrigation to crop ET, yes or no, we don't have different scenarios because we don't exactly, the devil's in the details with that, right? And so we don't know exactly, but at the end of the day, we do know the amount of fertilizer that was put on and the amount of fertilizer that was removed. And we basically take a reasonable set of assumptions for the management practices used in that growing season to develop our nitrate leaching estimate. And so we can describe those in more detail to you, but those are the main levers that we're modifying, is the A and the R.
You see benefit, you see benefit of having those information in the form, right?
I think so. I do, yeah. But for other reasons other than exactly defining two different modeling scenarios.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. We have time for just a couple more questions. We'll go to Michael and then Hannah, and then we will move on to the next item. Go to.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question for Eric. You mentioned that there are many examples of successes with addressing water quality without limits. And I wonder if you could share more on some of those examples. I know that Tess, at the end of her presentation, mentioned some of the work that the management zones are doing, which mostly are interim solutions of providing like replacement water. But if you could mention some of the other examples of successes of addressing water quality without limits in Region 5.
Sure. And Adam can feel free to hop in. He's got a lot more experience with some of the history of the water board, but especially in our surface water program, which kind of predates the irrigated lands program, we've had great success with identifying, we have monitoring going on, identifying where we have water quality issues with things like pesticides, rather than setting strict limits and obviously a ton of monitoring that would be required. It is mainly a outreach-based approach that we've taken in these watersheds, and we've had huge successes with being able to close out some of these management plans, get some of those issues resolved simply by really strong, robust outreach, both to the growers, to we coordinate with local ag commissioners on pesticide issues, things like that. So carrying that over to the groundwater side of things, I think it's going similarly well.
Yeah, and our rice pesticides program is another very successful program that's set and established, kind of benchmarks, but we didn't move to limits to individual growers, and it was applied across the rice growing areas, and it was highly effective at essentially ending concerns with taste and odor issues in drinking water for the city of Sacramento. So another very, very effective program. There's others too. I don't want to use up all the time, but certainly, the key to any of these programs is providing the right incentives and providing the education outreach and the tools so that people can make the decisions to solve these problems. And sometimes it's as simple in a surface water programs as having the right conversation and helping people understand kind of how to apply things properly and when not to. So yeah, I think that's, if there's any more questions, we can certainly follow up with more information.
Thank you both. Let's go to Michael and then we'll move on.
Yeah, Adam or Eric, could you explain the rationale to use A divided by R versus A minus R? You know, what was the thought process on that?
So Eric, certainly jump in if you like, but the A over R was something that was used and has kind of a history, A divided by R, for that kind of, for individual farmers and looking at that efficiency of how fertilizers are used. It was something that the expert panel before had recommended. And so that carried forward into our orders as a metric that individual growers could compare, how well am I doing in the context of other growers of similar crops in similar areas. And so the idea is that was carried over in that context. We have since thought about, just using A minus R kind of in a similar context, but the way the orders are written and how it was carried forward from that original expert panel, we've maintained that as its own metric, and I think it's a great way for growers and for outreach to growers to kind of, hey, to see that metric as something simple, right? The closer to one, the better I am. And to be able to compare it to other growers in their area is a simple metric that people can easily understand.
Bottom line, Michael, the State Water Board told us we had to do that when they issued the East San Joaquin order. It was a requirement of the East San Joaquin order.
Thank you. I do apologize, Richard. Time for one more question, and then we need to move on to the panel charge questions. Hannah, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. Really appreciate you guys being here and filling in some questions. I'm going to follow up with probably a lot more questions offline. But I just was wondering, we heard about kind of the missingness in some of the data and data quality concerns. And so I was just wondering if you could reconcile sort of the input to the model and the output you're getting and the quality of that.
Sure. Yeah, so there's other things we report in our values submittals that I didn't cover, but that does include sort of data discrepancies and what we had to do where and how much that had to happen. And so that's tabulated. I think one thing that we do, just as an example, is we look at SWAT's a process-based model. There needs to be a sufficient amount of nitrogen for the crop to grow and to realize a particular yield. And so we do a check. I mean, there's any number of reasons if say the grower actually did account for residual soil nitrate, or they farm on high organic matter soils and their A is relatively tight compared to their R, that could happen. And so for us to run the model, we actually assume more nitrogen is applied at a relatively high efficiency. And then sort of to offset that, we actually assume the N removal is marginally less than average. So if you look at Daniel's reports, there's always a range, right? And we tend to use the average, but we make the assumption that, okay, if this is a relatively lean system, we're going to assume that the nitrogen removal and the nitrogen concentrations in harvest is actually a little bit less than average. So it kind of offsets that way. And so I think that's one of the main things that I would highlight that we do.
Just to follow up, do you validate on yields at all? Like if I'm remembering correctly, the forms have a yield number on it. Can you validate on that at a field scale or township?
In terms of validate, you mean, well, certainly when we model, our model runs are intended to match the A and the R, i.e. the yield. So our model runs do produce the same yield. I mean, that's something we're trying to do there for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you to all of the presenters. There'll certainly be some more follow-up later, but let's go ahead and move on. So the remainder of the discussion today is going to be focused on your panel charge questions. Starting with questions 1 and 2 and the draft responses that have been provided so far. Daniel, you had a hand up. I wanted to turn it over to you.
Yes, just a brief comment. We may not, or depending on how much time we need, we may not be able to finish discussion on question 1 and 2, but I wanted to ask the other panel members whether it would be fine if we stopped discussion on question 1 and 2 at around 4 p.m. and then moved on to other questions and continued the discussion on 1 and 2 later, so that we can get some input on the 3, 4 and other questions, so that the teams can start writing summaries. And hopefully by 4 we have enough information so that Hannah and Richard could start on the revising or combining all the data. Our next meeting is already next Wednesday, so I think that's probably too short for Richard and Hannah to come up with a revised version. So I would suggest that next Wednesday we will continue the discussion on 3, 4, and 5, and then the following meeting, I think that's December 5th, we could come back to question 1 and 2 and finish that discussion if other panel members agree to that timeline. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. So a quick thumbs up, or I guess thumbs down to Daniel's suggestion would be great. You can find thumbs up under the reactions button. Let me go to Thomas and then Richard. Thomas? Oh, you're muted.
I was going to suggest maybe we do 1 and 2 today. Instead, we have strawman drafts out from the other authors for the other questions before we start discussing them, rather than discussing them today. I think we got so much work and so much thinking all about 1 and 2 and editing 1 and 2, and it's worth to have that discussion today. And do we have access to like where the latest version of 1 and 2 answer?
Yeah, so that's
the email.
It is available on the FTP site, and I also emailed it out to all panelists, I believe Wednesday. Let me check the exact time, but you should have it in your inboxes.
Okay.
And I'll update that time for you. Go to Hannah, then go to and Ruth.
Well, just a clarification, Daniel, did you say until 4 or until 5? Because I think we're rapidly approaching 4 p.m.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
yes,
5 p.m.
1 minute.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that would be my suggestion, so that we have time to at least start a bit, because the teams of 2, that they have at least a little bit of background. Otherwise, the drafts will represent only the opinion of 2 people. And if we start some discussion today, the drafts will represent the opinion of more than just the 2 authors.
Yeah. I would say, just from my experience, I won't speak for Richard, it was kind of helpful to have other people's input, just to like, I have just one view, and so it was just helpful to have other people's thoughts, that I could mull over to write that up. That would, yeah.
Go to?
Yeah, I probably should just put my hand down. Hannah and Daniel said the same comment. I think Ruth and I are writing question 3, and it'll be helpful to get feedback from the panel to write that. I think for question 1 and 2, we had everyone send in responses as well ahead of time. So that would be helpful. And just to Daniel's question earlier, I think if we touch on question 3 today, and maybe 4, it'll be helpful. And then I think revisiting 1 and 2 sometime else makes sense.
Thank you. Ruth?
I agree with all of that. And just a quick comment, I don't think we have access to thumbs up, thumbs down. We can just raise our hands.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that. Michael.
Daniel, if we do have some discussion on 1 and 2, is there still opportunity to suggest edits to 1 and 2 after today, or what was submitted is sort of where we have to stop?
Yeah, my suggestion would be that we have the discussion until 4 p.m. and then all that input, but Hannah and Richard could work on the revised version. They may not be able to include everything. There may be open questions. And then on December 5th, we come back to question 1 and 2.
Okay.
And just following up, Thomas, on your earlier question, the revised document was sent to all panelists on Wednesday, the 12th at 6 p.m. Sorry, it was kind of late evening. That document is also publicly posted on the FTP site, as well as, I believe, on the shared folders for the panel, but I'll double check that. All right, so let's at least, if I can make a suggestion, Daniel, at least jump into a discussion of questions 1 and 2. And to start this, I wanted to give, since Hannah and Richard were the lead authors on this, I know that they've had an opportunity to look at all of the great input that you all provided, and wanted to give them an opportunity to provide initial thoughts and then perhaps follow-up questions to everybody who submitted some responses. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Hannah and Richard.
Thanks. Richard and I did not have a chance to collaborate on who would try and help facilitate this conversation. Richard, do you
Go ahead, Hannah. No.
No? Okay. So just thank you everyone for your feedback on questions 1 and 2. I think Richard and I really tried to capture a lot of what we felt was said amongst the panelists. And I just brought up some notes. Hopefully everyone had a chance to read it, so I'm not gonna read through it. I thought there was general, although it sounds like maybe Michael, you'll have some more thoughts. There was general consensus. I wanted to maybe jump to Thomas's feedback first, just because I think it was a different line of thought than, well, not very different, but just to give you some maybe time to just talk about what you were thinking, if you wanted to, Thomas.
Okay. I was, how should I say it? First of all, I'm not disagreeing. I was just mostly trying to organize it. And since we didn't have really access to everybody else's comments, what I wrote was based on the draft that we received 2 weeks ago, something like this. And so I mostly tried to sort of organize it. And so what you'll see, especially for question 1, is I no longer, and I apologize that I didn't get to read what this other piece, and I'm not sure how much changed in the draft version 3 over the version 1 or 2 that I was editing. So I took the approach that rather than commenting on what I thought or not, I actually went right into editing. I much rather edit things than just comment on things. I set out by clarifying clearly sort of how we interpret the question, how the question reads, and what we can or cannot do about it, and what we wanted to do. And so that, first of all, I know off the basics, it seems the question talks specifically about limits, specifically about crop specific, and specifically about AOR on A-R, although it has language that says other metrics. And so I sort of explained that, no, we want to talk about more than just limits. We want to also talk about targets. We want to talk about more than just crop specifics. And there's other things than A-R. And so I wrote some things on all of that, some of which is reflected in what you and Richard wrote. And I structured it by limits and targets. So I tried to put all the points down there. Basic accounting units, we talked about crop versus area-based. Appropriate metrics, which also kind of goes into some of the other sub-questions, but I left it here. I propose that we talk about both the application limit, the application limits, as well as A-R percentiles a little bit more
And
the spatial scale, anonymization. So I tried to sort of list all of the things that we had and provide sort of answers that I heard that I would give myself as a draft and as a straw man.
Gotcha. Thank you. I was a little I thought that's helpful in clarifying, because I thought your interpretation was saying that we had to constrain our conversation to exactly what they were asking, but I appreciate. Yeah. Okay. And I also wanted to say, just like what stood out to me, I really appreciated the acreage. You were kind of talking that sort of nuanced discussion about, recharge rates, source area. And so I think that would be a really nice thing I think a lot of what you said was captured in the updated version, but that was not, and I would love to try and include that in the next iteration. Let me just get to my notes again.
Hey, Hannah?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I think, Hannah, if it's possible to get a little closer to your microphone, a few people are having trouble hearing.
Okay, gotcha. Is this any better?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. And then I think just it seems like there is consensus around having sort of ratcheting down targets. Yeah. Okay. That was kind of something that stood out to me, but that we all sort of agreed that it would be really the 50-pound or 31-pound target would be hard to achieve, but that we should make progress toward that. And then just one thing that I really wanted to highlight that I thought was really an interesting idea was Daniel's idea of the fee structure. So the changing the fees based on whether a grower is in that A-R target, and having reduced fees if they are. So I thought that was a really interesting idea, and wanted to kind of bring that up because that was not something I remember us discussing. I know that I missed the October 31st meeting because I was moving, so maybe it was discussed then, but would love to hear more about that. And then Richard, I'm going to turn it over to you. I have a couple other little small points, but I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Hannah, for getting this going. Yeah, I think, Thomas, unfortunately, you used an older version. And I think some of, like Hannah just said, some of what you were talking about in terms of the targets and limits, we included some of that in this new version. Basically, the question talks about limits, and we made the point of opening the discussion up to the use of also including targets as a concept. And that's a point that I know that you made very, very well. And I think one of the things that we did touch on was limits out at the 80 to 90th percentile. And that's a point that we made in this, and that the movement to the more of the more water quality protecting levels, we talked about them in terms of targets, and we talked about them we talked about an iterative process where, let's say, you have a limit out at the 80th, the 90th percentile, but then also, then there would be a process to also then try and have established targets based on, again, those percentiles. We didn't define where that would be, let's say at the 50th or 60th or whatever. But that to get to that, we talked about a iterative process, over a period of whatever. We threw out some, I can't remember if we threw out some actual dates, but like in the 3 to 5 year range to try and move the industry to a lower norm. And this is something similar to what is in Ag Order 4.0 actually. But I think what we would suggest though is that the iterative process, rather than just establishing a rigid goal, that it would be subject to some kind of evaluation, agronomic, environmental evaluation at the end of that period. And the idea there would be to encourage growers to use the judicious use of the best management practices to get to that goal in that time frame. So that is I think probably a significant thing that we talked about. But then we also did have a lot of discussion about the regional basis for every region is going to be different. Like what I've just been talking about is kind of Central Coast centric. Other areas it might be a different kind of a process. And
maybe we can just give Thomas, I think he raised his hand to respond.
Okay, yeah, Thomas.
Just really quickly, and this might be relevant to our discussion, so I wanted to maybe throw this at staff, this question. I edited whatever I found on the drive on Tuesday or Wednesday morning, on Tuesday. And my understanding was we were editing what we were presented with right before the last meeting or at the last meeting. That's what we get to edit. And then we can't really edit anything until it's presented again to the public and the authors of these questions have a chance to look at it. And so we will always work on old drafts and we will not see updates from other people until we have another public meeting, which that's kind of tough for us to get to the finish line here, I think. But maybe that's just a constraint that we have. So just for, to explain why I was working on an old draft. Yeah. And then I just wanted to also clarify quickly. In sort of my first bullets, I was trying to sort of structure why we're talking about targets and limits. So in just lay that out. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Hannah?
I was raising my hand to get Thomas.
Okay. Yeah, just a couple of, just one other thing I'll mention and then just open it up was there was a discussion and Ollie gave us some feedback on, there's going to be certain situations in certain regions where maybe these water quality, nitrate and water quality regulations don't quite make sense, and also there might be some regions where, or some crop types also that maybe do exemption from the regulatory process because of the shown lack of risk for nitrate contamination. So those are just some, Sam, those are just some quick highlights that came to my mind on my notes that I have here. So I don't know. I think we want to start general discussion.
Well, thank you. I know that Bagley Keene does create some restrictions for all of you in the way that you interact together. And unfortunately, I think it's just one of those things in the interest of transparency we kind of have to work around as much as possible. We are endeavoring, and if you have any process suggestions on how to improve it and make sure that you get documents in a timely fashion, we're trying to send documents to you via email that require immediate attention. I believe the document went out on November 6th with a deadline to respond to comments by this Tuesday, November, what is that? What was that, the 12th? So, you know, if at any point you feel like you need access to something, you're not seeing it, or there's any confusion, by all means, please do reach out and we'll make sure to get that to you as quickly as possible. At this point in the discussion, though, would it be helpful if I pulled up the version 3 that combines all of the comments as well as Thomas's version, just so you have it up on the screen in front of you? I have that right here and can pop it up on the screen if it's useful. Give me just a moment. Yes, please.
Just wanted to highlight maybe something that we could chat about. That Daniel also added, which appreciated, was the part about the only fields where the same crop has been grown for 3 consecutive years by the same grower are included. Yeah, and just sort of wrapping our heads around that complexity.
Yes, I know that was a comment that a couple of you had. The version that went out to everybody Tuesday, and that was publicly posted as well, does note exactly who made the comment. I did my best to track that and put it in as a comment. I encourage everybody to open it in front of you, but I'll put it up on the screen as well. And I'll just flag that once we get to it. I'll flag the issue of kind of the timing that Hannah just raised once we get to it. Let me pull this up though.
If I may briefly comment on what Hannah said, I'm very much in favor of 3-year averages, but they should be calculated in a way that basically every field has a chance to be included, and it should not be the way outliers are currently calculated in the Central Valley, because that excludes a lot of fields. Basically, every field with a crop rotation with annual crops is not included and will never be considered an outlier if the same crop is not grown for 3 years. So that was my comment. We would need a different approach, and we couldn't just use the approach that's currently used for outliers.
Right. And I wonder what because the central, I mean, I guess this is a slightly different issue, but with all of the leasing of land that happens, and a lot of growers not being the landowners, you know, how to track that and get INM the reports or notifications to the growers. But I think this is another complexity that I hadn't thought about.
Daniel, wouldn't, if we just had it on a physical acre basis, and whatever crops that are grown, get around that problem?
Exactly.
Yes, it would no longer be crop specific then. So if you have one year, it would be corn, then tomato, then sunflowers. It would be a mix of the average A-R would be a mix of the 3.
That's okay. Why not? I mean, from my perspective, that is a groundwater perspective, it's really the land area that's relevant and not a specific crop. And so doing that 3-year average to specifically get at the question of how much nitrate might be going into groundwater, that's a land area basis, and it wouldn't matter which crop is grown in those 3 years. And so for that loading and doing it over 3 years, it doesn't have to be crop specific. The crop specific data, and this is kind of what's happening in the Central Valley, is still there. And so you can use A minus R or A over R or any other metric on these crop specific values to then get to the question of what do I do to make, to make improvements to the loading. And as long as both of them are there, I think we can see on one hand how much goes to groundwater, and on the other hand, what needs to be done on a crop specific basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the only challenge, or there are two challenges. First of all, if it's an average over 3 different crops, the grower may do a very good job with one crop, but a really bad job with another. So then there would still be room for improvement, but the average across 3 crops would not reflect that. The other thing, if the manager or the operator changes, if another grower leases a piece of land for just 1 year, then again, it would not be, the 3-year average could not be calculated on that field. Or, well, it can be calculated, but who is then responsible for if it's too high, if it was leased for 1 year to another grower? But I think it's probably not something we need to solve what the best approach is, but it's something that should be kept in mind when the waterborne coalitions discuss what would be the best way to calculate 3-year averages. It could also be, let's say, if it's crop specific, it could be all the cornfields managed by one grower and a 3-year average across all these fields. Then it would not be field specific, but a grower would see, okay, my corn management compared to my neighbors is on the good side or on the not so good side. Ruth?
Does it make a difference whether we're talking about, it says here, relating back to grower management practices versus modeling or aggregating or putting together data that's being used to assess at the township level or at a higher level? Because if it's going back to the grower to let them know if they're an outlier or work with them on improving their management practices, then it really only makes sense to work with the grower who's currently operating that piece of land versus somebody that was there and is now gone. So I'm not sure what the best way to address this is, but maybe the coalitions have thoughts about that. Maybe we could solicit some feedback from them on how to set that up, because it seems like there's a need to calculate these large scale data sets, and you don't want to leave fields out. But then when you're looking at individual APNs or growers, that you want to work with the grower that's currently there. I mean, that maybe sounds really self-evident, but is that right? That's kind of the problem we're discussing?
The point I raised was mainly when you start calculating 3-year averages, then it becomes a bit more challenging. If different crops are grown or different growers manage a specific field. But I think it's a detail that can be solved. I just like to raise awareness of that, because the easiest way would be to say, well, we've already done it for outliers, let's just continue doing it the same way. And I don't think that would not be a good solution.
Right.
Thomas, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not really quite following. I totally understand, I think, your point, and I appreciate that when you have changing land ownership and it's the renter who has to report and not the landowner, then the question becomes, who's ultimately responsible if over the course of 3 years or 5 years, and you had, I don't know how these systems work, so I have to make it up. You had 2 or 3 renters, but on an area basis, then it ends up to be too high. Who do you actually approach about it? And I agree, that's probably a mechanical piece or an administrative piece that we don't have to worry about. On the outlier side, in the Central Valley, from what Ken just presented, you have, on one hand, sort of this area-based 3-year average loading, actual loading calculated with CV SWAT from the INMP data. You have INMP data for every anonymous member ID for every field they grow, and you can track that over multiple years for specific crops on specific fields that are associated with the anonymous member ID. And it's published looking at tables that we have received. And so I don't understand the concern that we couldn't track, outliers that occur within a 3-year period, even, if there's one crop that's particularly bad versus other crops being particularly good and the end result is acceptable. Why the end result is an important part from a loading perspective, because if the loading over 3 years is acceptable, that's great. No matter whether there was an outlier in the middle or not, as long as that's accounted for in the loading. But the coalition in the Central Valley still has access to the individual crop data and can say, oh, there was an outlier here. Maybe we need to work with this grower and see whether we can improve that. And all these tools are there.
That's correct. It's just the way outliers are calculated right now. The coalitions, at least the East San Joaquin Valley coalitions, first excludes all the fields that did not have the same crop for the past 3 years, and they exclude all the fields that didn't have the same manager. And only then they start calculate. They look at the data and say, oh yeah, these are outliers. So the fields that have a crop rotation are already excluded, even though in one of the years they may have a really high value, but they are automatically excluded, and only those that had the same crop for 3 years are included. But all the value is there, and so all I'm trying to say is that should not happen when we start comparing with targets or limits. Then every field needs to have a chance to be included. The way it is calculated right now, that growers with annual crops are hardly included. Growers with orchards are included most of the time for outlier calculations.
I totally agree. Everything should be included when it gets to a comparison with targets. I don't understand, though, how the outliers would be excluded, given what Ken just shared, how the values are reported. Are outlier values not reported?
They're reported. Outliers are identified and as growers who need education, or they are asked to attend extension meetings. That's at the moment the purpose, to identify outliers.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
That's the main reason outliers are actually determined.
Yeah,
But
and so you're saying
they
they might not be reaching out to the full pool of people that probably need education and outreach.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, I know that Michael, you have your hand up. You had your hand up for quite a while. I'm sorry, I know that
makes sense. I would agree.
Godu, did you have something you want to share, and then we go to Michael?
Yes, my comment is sort of above, so it's a sort of a different conversation than what we're having right now on outliers. On the first, I had a comment also. I hadn't seen this newer version, so I apologize. But the language here, I think, which was added by Richard and Hannah, was differentiating between application targets and limits. And I was wondering if, as a group, as a panel, we're moving away from recommending application targets and just the discharge A-R metric, Yeah, maybe so just a question for Hannah and Richard on that, and then I can provide more feedback.
Michael, was your comment in reference to what Daniel and Thomas were just talking about, or something else?
I was going to comment that I agree with Daniel, that all the fields should be included. I'm not quite sure what causes a grower to be flagged as a outlier. If it's just a single field that's has a very high A minus R or A over R, or is it just for that crop that they're growing on? All, in general, they're always on the high side because there is always different fields that once in a while you have to put more nitrogen on. In the Central Coast, I believe, because we're looking at a ranch scale, it's really, if the ranch is really high, then it would be flagged. Which seems like a more reasonable way to flag a grower that needs outreach. So
Daniel,
maybe looking at, at the field level, where flagging growers is a little bit, at too small of a scale.
I agree. So that's a difference between the Central Coast and the Central Valley. And in the Central Valley, it's on the field scale, but probably the farm scale will be more appropriate.
Yeah, and I think that does dovetail with what Godo was the question that she had. And we have some verbiage, if you go down a little bit on that, Sam, where we talked about, for if you have a crop that one crop a year, then the the targets would apply to that to that crop. But if you have multiple crops per year, like on the Central Coast, then the targets relate to the ranch. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, Godo.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was going to come back to Godu. I just want to check in because I know that. Sorry, just to clarify, I was not ignoring your question, Godu. Okay.
You're fine. I guess I'm trying to clarify between having discharge limits or targets and application at the application phase of crop production, having limitations there as well. So those two being different than when you have A minus R, when you're, subtracting what you've applied than what you've removed, but having application limitations if we're actually going to get to protecting water quality and how much, particularly I'm thinking through synthetic fertilizer is applied at the different stages of crop production and what the crop is uptaking. So having some language about targets or limits on that application at the different phases. And this will also look different for one crop versus different crops being planted and what the next crop takes.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Richard.
Well, if you were going to answer it, Hannah, go ahead.
I was going to say and I think I put this comment in here that's up on the screen right now about like there's a point at which end applications become excessive and that, well, I guess a couple different things. So I think in areas where we don't have robust data on A minus R discharge, that maybe applications can be a place where those regions start looking at, what are the kind of the norms by soil type and climate, what's recommended by the UC, and other extension providers or technical assistance providers, and then trying to bring to provide outreach and target those farmers that are in the 80th or 90th percentile and bring those application rates down. And then I think maybe I think there was conversation amongst this group about targeting the 80th, 90th the 80th and 90th percentile of A-R folks. And I was thinking in addition to that, the application rates as well. And
I
then
think that's spot on. Hannah, if you have that language in the other document, in some other part of the document, then that's great. I see your comment there for having that. And then just to further clarify, you're referring to this 88th and 90th in region 3, region 5, because we know of the other regions where we don't even have much information on and applied in like the regions with like the vineyards or nurseries that
yeah,
we've heard from folks, but like we have information in region 3, region 5 on some of this.
yeah, I think this would be predominantly for region 3 and 5, but as a first go where there aren't, you know, these coefficients for removal, there could be looking at sort of the range of applications for a crop by soil, by climate. And though that would take a lot of data and gathering to do, you know, and including in really, you know, diversified systems, in these, you know, complex systems that we don't have really good values for those cropping systems, will require a lot of research and data collection. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I go to, if I understand you, I mean, I would not advocate for getting into the weeds with the growers fertility program, other than to say that one of the things I think that's going to help a region like region 3 is for people to use you know, nitrate to guide fertilizer applications based on the quantity of residual soil nitrate that's in the soil, and then using, you know, good irrigation practices to keep it in the root zone. You know, those are practices I think, you know, this expert panel has to advocate for. But you know, like I think, you know, recommendations about how much nitrogen that, you know, that a crop needs. I mean, I always shrug my shoulders and say it depends, you know, on how much residual nitrogen is sitting there, how much nitrate's in the water that they're irrigating with, and so forth. You know, that's the approach I think we should be taking.
Michael?
Well, I was just going to comment more about, you know, this document, that we don't want it to become too cumbersome, you know, and it's got to be flexible, you know, for the different areas. But maybe, you know, we're not going to come up with all the specific answers. So really trying to develop a framework. I like up front, you know, where we put some background information or definitions of things that we're going to talk about in the answer that come below. And also to have, you know, very succinct, I guess, direct answer, that's a clear answer, and with some bullet points supporting that answer. But if we get into, you know, to the weeds of specific places, you know, different regions, it will be, you know, not a good framework for, you know, the future, I think, to be used as a document to sort of guide all these different regional boards. So just think it's getting a little cumbersome to read. You know, it's, I think Thomas is 11 pages now. So anyway, we can make the language simple so growers, consultants can read it and understand it, be helpful.
Sam, maybe you can clarify, but this is a draft, right? We're then gonna kind of bring it together into something more.
Well, most definitely. And Richard, I know we had chatted right before the meeting started. One possibility, I think the panel and staff, please jump in if I'm kind of talking out of turn here. the panel really has carte blanche to organize the document however they would like. Making it readable, I think, is very, very important. If there's supporting information or kind of a really stepwise process for meeting some of these individual bullet points that you've mentioned, that could perhaps be included as an appendix. But I think, thinking about readability for both the board and for the general public is probably a useful thing to do. Definitely in a draft form, though, and even though we're having an extended discussion on these questions right now, it's not your last opportunity to weigh in on them either.
Can I just add, Sam, is there a possibility like to put it into a Google Doc that just the panel members could edit for a few days and try to, because it's really hard with these different versions.
Yeah, I acknowledge that. I'm gonna have to I'll have to ask staff to answer that question specifically around Google Docs. Erica or others with the State Water Board, can you answer Michael's question?
Hi, we can provide clarity there that putting in a Google Doc is not something that we can do, so we'll need to continue to facilitate the comment, so it's not a serial communication. Yeah.
But what I think we might want to do is spend a little time at the next meeting, and we could walk through a process and maybe refine it, or do some sort of way of like kind of developing a flow chart that would have you guys working on it in such a way where like maybe you discuss questions, and like Daniel was saying, and December 5th you come back and look at another revised document, and then it gets commented on. So maybe we could lay out a possible path where you have the ability to see a revised document, comment on that document, and then discuss it, and then the authors revise it again. So it's some fine tuning we can do, I think, to help support and iron out a process that works for everybody. But yeah, apologies that we can't let you work on Google Docs.
For it, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. And I was trying to get some structure, but yes, it gets very quickly very lengthy, and maybe we'll eventually need to think about how we put stuff into supplemental material versus where all the real meat is. But on the substance, I think there is I lost my train of thought. I think there's two things that I wish just lost my train of thought entirely. I apologize. Let me get back to it. I have to think about this. Sorry, I got too distracted.
No worries. Ali, go for it.
Well, I think Sam also put that question for the panel, and I have the same question. I think, even though it's too difficult for us to go with targets or limit or whatever, but I think we still don't have any clear idea, because somewhere we say we are going with target, then we repeat target and limit. It seems we are still not clear, the approach we want to take. And I think that's a very tough, decision, but we have to make that, be clear with the draft. And I think if we say target, we don't need to repeat or put together target and limit again in the text and repeat it. Somewhere target and limit. I think we should make decision on that part. So we want to go with target, limits, or a combination, or how I think we should discuss to make it clear.
Go for it, Richard.
Ali, to answer your question directly, the way that I understood, all the feedback that we got, we're looking at limits for the upper 80th to 90th percentile. We haven't decided on 80 or 90 yet, but that's where the limits are going to be. And then to move, you know, an industry to a goal that gets, let's say the limits, you know, way up, maybe it's 400 or 500. In the Central Coast, if you look at the data, that's where it is. Okay, the 80th, 90th percentile is up at 500. If you want to bring that industry closer to our goal, our ultimate goal of, you know, of improving water quality, then that's where we're talking about setting goals and then having a process to make that happen.
Thank you, Richard. I think, yeah, you picked up my thread here, and Ollie. The things, I think, two things to offer to structure this, and I think, Richard, you just did that. There is a way to set limits at sort of the end where, you know, it's clearly not acceptable if you throw 1,000 pounds of nitrogen to grow a lettuce crop or to grow an almond crop in a particular year. So my question to you would, those of you that actually work on nutrient management would be, are there upper limits that we can identify as limits where it's like, yeah, this is really, you're way out there, no matter what reason you may have had, but that's like way out there and it's way too much. So setting the limits either in an absolute way for each crop or in a percentile way. My question to and I cannot answer that, is among the crop folks here, is there an 80th or 90th percentile or an absolute number by crop that we can say, yeah, this is really out of bounds. This is not, shouldn't be legal to do this. And then there is, and that could go for two things. One, discharge limit, A-R, or whatever is being used for discharge. And I think we'll have to have a separate conversation about that. But we could apply it to the discharge, or we could apply it to management practices, both limits or targets, right? And I think it helps to sort of distinguish between those two. And whether we want to, and where we want to say you need limits and targets for one or the other. In the Central Coast order, they have targets sort of at the upper end, and then they have limits at the lower end. And I've recently learned from a conversation with Tess Dunham that actually the limits are usually at sort of that final goal versus the targets are the milestones in the middle. What I think I heard you say, Richard, and what I would promote is, let's think about the limits as, okay, this is clearly out of bounds.
Yes.
Thomas, I think, froze.
We can set limits for that. Is in fact protective of groundwater. We don't want to do limits. We can maybe talk about targets, but not limits. Is that correct?
You know, you cut out. Can you repeat what you just said there, Thomas?
Yeah, I apologize. This might be my internet connection. I was saying that it's helpful to think, about we can set limits and targets on application rates or management practices. And we can set limits or targets on what's actually being discharged to groundwater, right? So those are the two realms. And I don't know that we need to make a decision which one. We just need to be clear which one we're talking about. And I think we can talk about both. In terms of whether it should be limits or targets, what I hear you say, Richard, and what I would propose is we think about limits for things
Oh no, you cut out again. Thomas,
that are clearly out of bounds, that saying, you know, this is a limit, this should be enforceable. But when it gets to sort of these inspirational goals, we should talk about targets. We're not ready to talk about limits. What I hear you all say is we can't for sure say what the limit should be. So let's talk about targets.
Yes. I mean, Hannah, if I could butt in to answer specifically his question, because I think it was directed at me, but that's exactly correct. And, you know, that process of establishing the goals and working towards the goals and so forth, that has got to be done with data. It's got to be done with a concerted effort and an approach that takes the agronomic considerations into consideration, but you're moving towards that environmental goal, and you have a time frame. And you say, okay, we're going to take 3 to 5 years to get down to 400 or whatever, and then at the end of that process, you do an evaluation. Who was able to get there? Who was not able to get there? Why not? And and then we're hoping that people really embrace these best management practices. They actually do it, and really do all the practices that we're going to talk about with cover cropping and soil testing and utilizing nitrate in the water and all of these things. So that's it.
And just really quick, I want to do a time check. We have 10 minutes until the top of the hour that Daniel suggested. So just Michael, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you for that. But I'm sorry, before you jump in, Michael, just on this question of targets versus limits, it is something that Karen Mogus discussed a little bit on October 31st. And it could be that, the panel is best suited to explain why either limits or targets may be more or less protective of water quality, but leave the decision on which to select to the board. Annalise, I think you may have wanted to weigh in on this, so just wanted to give you that opportunity since I know it's really relevant to this line of discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Sam. I think you captured it. I know that this came up as a specific question that one of the panel members had asked regarding what's appropriate in terms of limits versus targets. And so I think the idea was really, and the intent of questions 1 or 2 were to really say, is there enough data for a limit? And that kind of gets to, if there's not enough data for a limit, what does the panel recommend?
Thank you.
Sorry for jumping in.
I was just going to add on to what this discussion about targets and limits that I agree, we could set limits, which I guess would be, based on the presentation from Karen last week, was that those are, definitely enforceable. But it sounded like that's a phased in thing. You have different steps that the water board can take in enforcing that. With the targets, that should be what we scientifically understand that is possible and has to be demonstrated, I think, through research, demonstrations in fields, farm advisors, specialists. They got to do work with growers to show what is possible in terms of the targets. It's not just look at the data of the A-R and say, well, the median should be the target. I think it has to be agronomically feasible to set those targets, and with time we can keep reevaluating it as we get better technologies and better ability to use nitrogen more efficiently. And then there should be some reward, I think, for growers that can go beyond the targets. They're more efficient than most growers. And that's something the regional board or the coalitions would have to figure out. But it'd be a way to encourage growers to keep moving forward and becoming more efficient. And that could be lower fees, like I think Daniel Geisler was suggesting. I also wanted to comment that the idea that some areas might be exempt because there's no issues with nitrate in the groundwater. And what I understood from the presentation last week is even a discharge can be also to surface water. So the A-R is also important for understanding discharges of surface water. And I believe down in Imperial, there's a lot of surface water that goes into the Salton Sea, and there's concern of nitrogen there. So if it's not going to the groundwater, it's being drained and going to surface water.
Ruth?
I want to just go back to the discussion about the 80th or 90th percentile and the application rates. I wonder if it's possible to, instead of using application rates for the 80th or 90th percentile, to use the A-R values and take the 80th or 90th percentile of those, because then you can standardize across crops more. I just wonder if, I know we've seen data on crops where the 80th or 90th percentile is egregiously above what most growers are doing, but I don't know if that curve is the same for all crops and all systems in all regions. And you might have systems where, for example, let's say you have vineyard systems where for quality control, you're applying low nitrogen and it's pretty standardized across multiple growers, that you might not get a curve with a really high 80th or 90th percentile that's very different from the rest. So I just would be careful about standardizing that percentile for application rates across cropping systems. And I wonder if maybe A-R is a better way to determine who's really the outlier. Or maybe we could define particular crops that we really have the information for and list them as eligible for that kind of action.
So my suggestion would be that we calculate percentiles on a per crop basis, so that we see growers who have or growers who are out there compared to the neighbors who grow the same crop. But also, let's say crops that are very low, if they are below the threshold or the how do they call it, the benchmark, then of course they wouldn't be count as the 80 or 90% tile if their values are already negative. So, but I think, in my opinion, it would make most sense to look at percentiles on a per crop basis, because otherwise, let's say an extreme example, we have an area where 80% is alfalfa. So every grower, if we just look at all the percentiles, every grower who doesn't grow alfalfa would already automatically be in the 80th or 90th percentile. So that makes it a bit more challenging.
Right.
I would propose doing it per crop and per region.
I agree.
A few nodding heads around that suggestion. I know that we're just about at the top of the hour and just wanted to get any additional feedback on Daniel's suggestion there.
I think it has to be by cropping system, because if it's vegetables, you can't, it'd be hard to do that, you know. And what
I
if
agree.
it's,
When you have multiple crops, yes.
yeah, and what if it's a nursery, you know, how do you compare the marigold grower if he's the only marigold grower around there, you know?
One of the things is this discussion is showing the difference between different regions. You know, region 5 is more crop based, and region 3 is land based, and so I guess when we write up this section, we want to indicate, you know, have some flexibility, you know, incorporate these comments that we're getting here right now to make it, you know, flexible for the situation in each region.
Daniel?
So, Richard and Hannah, do you think you have enough information to have incorporate the comments and probably reconcile your documents, the beginning of your documents with Thomas's comments, and have a cleaned version by December 5th or a few days before our December 5th meeting, so that we can all have a look at it and then continue the discussion then?
I'll tell you, we are a bit out of a disadvantage. I mean, it would be ideal if we could work directly with Thomas on this, but I know the law doesn't provide for that. But Thomas, how about if we make a stab as best we can to incorporate your your comments, and then I don't know what you think, Hannah, but that's what comes to my mind.
Yeah, maybe a question to staff whether we can accelerate how many iterations we can do without stepping over Bagley rules. So we don't have to wait until December 5th to say, okay, this is what I thought would be in there, or this is what I didn't think should be in there.
My comments? Yeah, you know, we're gonna run it to ground, and hopefully by hopefully early next week we'll be able to get back to you about what are our options to provide earlier versions of drafts and distribute it if possible. So we'll look into what mechanisms might be available to us to do that.
Yeah.
And then we'll know by their meeting on Wednesday what's possible.
Go ahead, Ruth.
Even if we knew the order of people commenting, or we could sign up for an order, or it takes more coordination, I know, and it's probably also kind of a pain, but just so you know, whether you're seeing a clean draft or a draft that other people are simultaneously commenting on and you don't know what they're saying. So I mean, anything would be helpful, I think, to mitigate that.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. We're gonna gather all of this and then just see what, brainstorm a solution.
One other piece that I wanted to just briefly bring up is in the document on that bullet that we talked about, that Daniel had inserted his comments on the outliers. It says the panel agreed that applied nitrogen minus removed nitrogen is the most appropriate metric for setting targets. I wanted to caution us to be that specific, because in my interpretation of what the Central Valley does, which was just presented to us, they're not looking at A minus R. They're not setting targets in A minus R. They're not setting even their values in A minus R. They're using what comes out of a model, as opposed to looking at applied nitrogen and removed nitrogen. And I would not feel comfortable. I find that concept and that approach absolutely viable and appropriate. And I think we ought to be more generic than just saying A minus R is the best metric. Just something to throw out. I tried to touch on that in my document, Hannah and Richard. So that's something to keep in mind when you edit it. Because A minus R, in my interpretation, refers specifically to report your applied nitrogen on your amendments and report your harvest, and we'll go from there.
Okay, great.
Well, thanks a lot, Richard and Hannah. It's a huge task, and it's not getting easier, I think, incorporating all these comments. Don't feel pressured to have a final version by our next meeting, but any progress you can make, and you can leave some things open if you need clarification on the comments we make. Just leave it open, and we can discuss it on the 5th. So don't feel pressured to have a final version that everybody will be happy with, but any progress will be great.
Okay.
Sam, can we go maybe, and Daniel, seeing how this is going with Q1 and Q2, we got a lot more questions to answer and go and do this with. It's getting to be really scary to do this between now and Christmas, which is the day after tomorrow. And I was wondering whether we can go over how this process now is going to work in next steps briefly. Sam, whether you have sort of an idea of how we work this.
Oh, sorry. I know that staff have been working really hard on a process document to share a kind of a concept for how to get from here basically to January, as you know, when a complete draft would be due. And Erica, you in particular have been working hard on that. I know that we were planning on sharing that next Wednesday, but I don't know if you had any information you can share now.
Yeah, I mean, I think based on the discussion today, we're definitely gonna go back and relook at what were the we thought at the time, but, you know, we were envisioning 3 primary points of discussion where, you know, you have your first initial discussion, you gather the information, staff would compile the transcript of the meeting, and then the lead authors would have that to work on. They write their first draft, and then the draft gets circulated ahead of the next public meeting. You all discuss it. We do the transcript again, ask for comments to the draft and combine them like Sam did for questions 1 and 2. And then you discuss that draft, which is, you know, similar to what we're doing today. And then the authors would take that, revise it, and that revised document, which it could be that revised document or a later one. We could iterate on that process, which I think is what Daniel's suggesting needs to happen. But we would eventually, I believe that Daniel would become the primary editor of the document, and all the pieces would go to him to compile and put it into a single report. And then you all would ideally have another meeting where you get to see this combined document. And then you would continue to work on it until you're comfortable with the document. So that's sort of the initial thought, but it's very, you know, I think there's a lot of feedback today, and we absolutely can reach out to our legal counsel and ask for whatever other possible ways that we could facilitate this and just create a list of potential options for you all, so that way you would at least know, like, what are some other ways this could work? Because it's just one way, but we can, you know, we want to come up with a way that works the best. And we're happy to do whatever we need to do on our end to facilitate that. It's just, you know, what is allowed is what we need to really, what are our options?
So big takeaway there is stay tuned. We'll get you info as soon as we have it, but clearly we need to think through some options on how to expedite reviews. So I know there was discussion of continuing with 1 and 2 throughout the rest of the meeting, but Daniel, I'd really look to you. We had talked about introducing questions 3, 4, and 5 just for very quick initial reactions from folks. What's your thinking on the remaining 40 minutes or so we have of panel discussion?
Yes, I think if Richard and Hannah are fine, or if they don't have questions or related to our comments, then I would say we stop discussing question 1 and 2, come back to it on December 5th, and now have an initial discussion. Thanks, Richard. I don't see Hannah how she agrees too. And then have an initial discussion on question 3, 4, and 5, so that the teams of 2 can start writing a draft that we then also can start discuss on December 5th.
Okay.
And so may I share my screen?
Yes, definitely.
So question 3, and it's what Sam just showed, but so are there any scientific or technical consideration or advances related to the factors discussed in the first agricultural expert panel report? And we got a clarification on that last time by the water board. So these factors that the question refers to are in Appendix C, based on the explanation we got last time, and are nitrogen transformation rates, volatilization, crop removal, carryover, detailed leaching factors, and then also type of crop, trees versus vines, and the amount of rainfall. So that's what question 3, when it talks about factors, that's what is meant. So are there any specific or technical consideration or advances related to these factors that the State Water Board should take into account in future policy decisions regarding implementation issues or the direct enforceability of the nitrogen-related limits or targets. I think we can expand that, discussed in question 1 and 2. Any comments or suggestions?
Daniel, could you leave that slide up again?
Sure.
Not the question, but the factors.
Yeah. These are the factors. If I may start the discussion, the expert panel report was in 2014. I think in the meantime, we have made a lot of progress with crop removal. We have identified crop coefficients, and I think both Central Valley and Central Coast have shown that using coefficients and the yield reported is a way to determine nitrogen removed. So I think, in my opinion, it has shown that that works for a lot of crops, probably not all of them, but it is an approach that works. It's not for future, but that has already been done in the meantime or since 2014. But we don't have coefficients for all the crops yet, and as we already discussed, more are needed.
We may need more, information on denitrification and volatilization. One issue I think with denitrification, maybe Thomas knows this, but not all what's measured in these denitrification rates is nitrous oxide. But my understanding is a lot of the denitrification goes to N2 gas, which is not measured.
I think that's the challenge. A lot of studies focus on nitrous oxide because it's a greenhouse gas, and total nitrogen losses are hardly measured. First of all, N2 is not a greenhouse gas. Second, it's almost 80% of the atmosphere, so it's really hard to measure how much is released because there's already that much in the air. But that's definitely something we don't have a lot of data on. But also, the question is also, are there any scientific and technical advances? And my impression is with all the other things, the advances have been made, but I don't see anything that would actually change how the irrigated lands regulatory program should be implemented. I can't come up with anything that happened between 2014 and now that really changes how the irrigated lands regulatory program should be implemented.
What I'm about to say belongs in this conversation, but cover crop remove or immobilization of nitrate over the winter, I think there have been advances. I know, Eric Brennan's long-term trial, showed the efficacy of cover crops, but
I think we will have a detailed discussion on cover crops with question 7. But still, we can mention it here that as a teaser. Is there anything else we should include in our response to this question, or can we keep it relatively short?
I look at when you talk about carryover between crops, well, again, from the Central Coast perspective, you know, you have all the practices that you do during the growing season, and then you have the winter, which is kind of an uncontrolled situation. So there, you know, I think kind of talking about it as a kind of a almost like a separate factor, you know, a separate it's clearly a separate season, but it has a set of practices that go with it to deal with, you know, so that carryover, you know, and actually in the E thing starts to talk about, you know, the intensity of the rainfall and that sort of thing. I mean, that's what causes the problem with you know, leaching. So anyway, as you approach it, you know, some of these factors are during the cropping season and some are during that fallow period. That's how I kind of frame it.
Ruth?
Oh, sorry, that was, I think, a legacy hand.
So yeah, I totally agree with you, Richard. So do you think it's something the water board should take into consideration, or is it more something education and outreach should deal with? Or do we have a specific recommendation for the water board to include that in their decision making?
Well, yes, from the sense that you know, on the R side of the equation of the metric, you know, well, we're going to talk about it in question 7. You know, there are practices that can be recommended and encouraged and incentivized. And they're very real in terms of their impact on nitrate leaching. So yeah, from that perspective, I say yes.
Mm-hmm. Are there other points we should include here? So Hannah mentioned cover crop, Richard, more in general, cover crop and other management practices after harvest or between crops. Ruth?
I was going to say I agree with the previous comment, especially regarding incentives, because the question is implementation issues or the direct enforceability. And so I think it's beyond just enforcement, and we should also look at credits, incentives, and I think there is more recent research that we can refer to on those things.
Other comments? Godu and Ruth, you volunteered to tackle this question. Well, actually, we volunteered you, Ruth. Sorry, but do you think you have enough information to work on a first draft on this question, or the answer to this question?
I think we do. I wonder if there are specific studies that you all have in mind that you'd like us to include as references. Would it be possible to send those to Sam? Or how does that work, Sam?
Great question. So you're saying references that you'd like to get to the author teams for each one of the questions?
Right.
Yeah, so I think, and staff, please correct me if I'm wrong, if it's a reference document, we can post it up to kind of the shared site and then just blast an email out saying a new resource is available.
Great.
But staff, please correct me if I'm off base there.
Yeah,
Richard?
that works.
Oh, sorry, Erica.
Thumbs up.
And are you able to tell us it relates to question 3, or you just have to generally say a new resource has been posted?
No, I think it would be totally fine if you provide a reference that you think is a good resource for question 4, whichever question it is.
Right.
I can include that information. It's fine.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yep.
Richard and then Ngudu.
I'm curious why this question, they keep talking about rainfall and they don't mention irrigation management. You know, rainfall clearly is very, very important, but you know, during the growing season, the irrigation management seems like a response to this question should include that, in my mind.
That's a good point. Yeah. Ngudu.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm just thinking here about this question. Over the different presentations we've had, there was different regions talking about just the difference in their regions. And I wonder if this question we can talk about the application of Eastern Working Order everywhere. I know it's already that way, and I don't know as the panel our thoughts on having that Eastern Working Order and all the other regions have to abide by it. But just one thought I have for this question is maybe bringing in this conversation about regional differences, because for all the factors being listed here, I imagine they look very different per region. So I know that Eastern Working Order is the base one that applies to everywhere else, and I wonder if as a panel we want to comment on perhaps having applications looking different per region. But I'm just looking at the factors here, and I know that it might look different per region, even in terms of advances. So I'm just thinking about that through the lens of enforcement, but that's an open-ended question.
I think if you see differences, then definitely include that, or we should include that in our response. Yes. Ali?
Just one point about the number 2, you know, the nitrogen in over nitrogen removed by the crop. So it, you know, the panel recommended this, and then I think they just put some pitfalls here for that method, right? Or what was their intention for this, you know, statement? And I think it's good to include soil types here as one of the factors we should include there. Very important, I think, is more important than even crop. But they didn't mention about the soil types here.
We don't know what they meant back then, and it's in the appendix, so it wasn't the main focus. But yeah, if we want to include, expand that list to soil type and say, yeah, we have made progress and that the water board should consider that, yes, let's include that as a factor. It's just like irrigation, that should also be here. Thank you. Mike?
I guess I still don't quite understand how this is used, all these factors and things. Is this for the Central Valley where they, growers are filling out those spreadsheets for nutrient management? Or is it for doing SWOT modeling? Or is it just a sort of spreadsheet calculation of potential nitrate leaching? I just still don't quite understand how all these factors are used.
So that's part of the first expert panel meeting. So basically that precedes everything.
Yeah.
Well, after that, the Eastern Joaquin Valley or the order was developed. SWOT model came much later. So these were just considerations of the first panel said, well, these are other factors that are not considered, but may be considered. That's how I understand it. But that was all before, basically at the beginning of the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, and a lot has changed since then. That was 11 years ago, what they wrote.
Okay, so I don't know, going back to nurseries, that might be have more of a, they're not maybe discharging the groundwater because they have a impermeable barrier but just discharging out to surface water, or maybe they don't, but they have lots of different crops that they're growing. So where in that case, we don't have the crop removal information, but maybe they could monitor the applied nitrogen. But the A-R thing idea is probably not going to work for them. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Karen, do you have some background information on the first agriculture panels, or why it was in the report?
I don't, because I wasn't involved in the first panel, but I am going to suggest we get maybe a summary from Darren Polhemus on what the intent was behind this appendix and how it was used in consideration of the East San Joaquin order, that he was very involved in both processes. And I'd say maybe a short email that can be supplied to Sam for the entire panel to have. I don't see him on, otherwise I would flag him right now. So I'll follow up with him and get that turned around quickly for you.
I'm here, Karen.
Okay.
Oh, you are here. Darren,
Yes.
can you speak to that off the top of your head?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'm thinking you're talking about reference to question number 1 here and the subparts to it that are mentioned. Is that correct?
Question 3.
3.
This question here mentions factors, and we were informed last time that it refers to what I just shown, to the appendix in the panel recommendation.
Yeah, so the first panel really felt that, and I'm summarizing kind of my obvious impression of their discussion, that there was a lot to be learned from implementing the A/R component, that from that data, there may be other parts that are developed out of that would be useful to carry forward. And it's kind of why they picked this approach and recommended in their report that there be a reevaluation of the data set to see whether there were factors that then they didn't contemplate. But on the screen you're showing here now, they definitely were taking the approach of a simplification between the A and the R and the multi-year component, which then allows a simplification to not contemplate volatilization. Soil type shouldn't matter either, because you're really just looking at a balance of how much is applied, what was removed, and really running a simplification that isn't implementable by the farmers themselves with information they have. That was always key as well, right? I mean, a farmer's knows what his bill is for the amount of fertilizer he's applying, and he knows what he got paid for that got trucked off his crop. And those were the components that they were really focused on, trying to make sure that from that you could get there. There were some other cropping factors. We didn't have conversion factors for the removed, for a lot of stuff that was asked for the coalitions to develop, that would come into it as well.
Thank you. Ali, you have a comment?
Just one comment. If you want to add for the second part of this page, I think if you want to put soil types, put also soil conditions, because it's very important. In the desert, in the west side of San Joaquin Valley, the soils are salty and leaching fraction is higher. So which means the leaching also is higher, comes from the leaching practices. Is a factor, I think.
Thank you. So Ruth and Ngudu, can we let you work on a first draft or an
Yeah.
answer of this question?
I think this was probably an easier question than 1 and 2 that Hannah and Richard had. But this is we can put together a first draft based on the discussion here. And then just to clarify, if we're using the same format as last time, I know that the board staff just mentioned this. Would all the panel members send in their responses to this to inform us putting together that first draft? And I guess what will be a timeline for that first draft?
So probably this time it would not be possible because our next meeting is already on the 19th. So in order to send it to the water board for us to respond to it, I think the timeline doesn't allow for that. But if we have your draft probably right a bit before the meeting, that we can read it and then we would discuss it at the meeting directly. But I think we won't have it. We would have to work over the weekend to get it ready. So I would say probably if you have a draft, let's say Tuesday evening or Wednesday morning, if you could send it to the water board or Sam sends it to us, we have a quick look at it and then we can discuss it at our meeting on, I think it's in the afternoon again. Yes, at 3 p.m. on Wednesday.
One more question, Chair. There is a summarized document, like a meeting summary from just our discussion that the board staff they sent to us. Would they be sending that? They usually send a summarized. Sam, do you know if we'll receive that after this meeting?
Yeah. Yes, we can do that. It'll take us a couple days, knowing when we receive those comments, but we will do similar to what we did before, we'll summarize and then
Thank you.
Okay, great. Where are we? So if you don't, or Thomas, do you have a comment to question 3 or shall we move on to question 4?
No, on question 3, and I realize if I don't say it now, then it has to be a comment next Wednesday, and it's not going to get incorporated until January 1st. One thing to consider on all these factors is what CV SWAT already does for the Central Valley. There's a bunch of factors in there that are built into CV SWAT. And as Ken has pointed out, a lot of expertise went into building these factors. Volatilization, nitrogen transformation, crop removal. I think I'm not an expert on saying I could do this any better. I think we ought to let that stand as is, and I would not want to be in the way of having them need to change it because I know unless there is, to me, this seems like a big research question to go at auditing CV SWAT. And I don't feel comfortable doing this. And so I think we need to be really careful.
Thank you. So then we have a little bit more time. I think we already discussed much of question 4 when we discussed question 1. Is A-R an appropriate metric? And are there other methods or metrics that could help quantify nitrogen discharges? And I mean, if I may briefly summarize, I think we said, yeah, A-R is appropriate, but modeling could supplement A-R, or models like CV SWAT can supplement A-R and provide us additional information. What other aspects should we include in the response to this question, or am I totally off, Thomas?
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think one question I would have for staff is to clarify how 4 is in any way different from the question asked in 1. And it really ought to be embedded in 1 in our answer. And whether we can just move that in our answer, whether we can move the answer to question 4 to be part of question 1, answer to question 1. So that's a question to staff. My second point would be, I would not put A minus R as the answer. I would say any method that gets to that, we have multiple methods that are trying to approximate what the discharge to groundwater is. There's modeling methods, as for example in the Central Valley. There's methods to get to some approximation of what a complex model like CB-SWAT does with an A minus R formula. It leaves open what to put into A and R. Are we just talking about applied nitrogen? Are we talking about nitrogen from atmospheric deposition? Are we talking about mineralization from soil organic matter on the A side? How do we deal with volatilization on the R side? There's the entire CB-SWAT mass balance can be reconstructed as an A minus R if you put all the terms that move into the soil compartment on the A side, and if you put all the components that come out of the soil compartment on the R side, right? So even CB-SWAT or any other model will have to comply with some kind of a nitrogen mass balance with the fact that it needs to be balanced on the physical amount of nitrogen going in and out of the soil compartment and track all of that. And so, yes, in that sense, A minus R is absolutely appropriate, but it means you have to account for all the pieces that are A and for all the pieces that are R. So I don't know how to give a straightforward answer on this. So if you put all the pieces in A and you put all the pieces in R, yes, it's that's the way to do it. And then any model that can track that would be an appropriate way to do it. If it's just nitrogen applied and nitrogen harvested, is that really the right answer? It's definitely a good answer, and I don't think any region that uses that answer would be wrong in doing so. That would be my answer to this question.
Thank you. Ruth?
I agree this overlaps a lot with question 1. I want to make sure that we do capture that second question. Are there any other methods or metrics that could help quantify nitrogen discharges? And I think we do touch on that in 1, but the thing I want to make sure is included is systems where it might be easier to quantify that with just nitrogen applied, where yield is difficult to measure, or where nitrogen removal coefficients are not available, or where it's just not possible to calculate R. Do we feel like that's included in our response to question 1? I think it could be, or do we want to focus on that here in question 4?
Thanks. Richard?
So I think A minus R is a model. You're trying to come to an understanding of how much loading is coming about as the result of producing a crop. And so at its barest bones fashion, you have fertilizer applied, the pounds of nitrogen that leave the field in the boxes. And one of the things I think is that A minus R can be, the precision of it can be improved, and this is what in Ag Order 4.0, and that's why, well, we're going to talk all about it in question 7. They had the discount factors for the fertilizers and compost, and then they had the scavenging credits, and they had the these different components, and I think this is, in a way, this is almost kind of like what CB-SWAT is doing, is it's trying to well, and it does do it, captures all of this information and then spits out an answer. And that can be done with a pencil and a paper, and it can be done with that computer model. And as long as you, like Thomas just said, as long as you have all those pieces. And that's what I think our task with this panel is, to try and make sure that we acknowledge all of those pieces as much as we can and encourage their use as much as possible.
Thank you. Mike?
I pretty much agree with Richard. The way I see the A minus R is, it's not directly as completely scientific. It's more like a guideline for growers on how to understand how they're managing nitrogen, right? If they're over applying or sort of on target. Because if we did it more scientifically, maybe we couldn't give them all the credits we'd like to give them for use of cover crops. With this metric, we can make some incentives in there to use cover crops, to use high carbon amendments for the removal side, and encourage them to find other removal methods like denitrification, bioreactors. So I think the modeling would be more of the scientifically appropriate way to sort of get at what's the impact to groundwater. And so you sort of use them in conjunction with each other.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we also have to be aware. It is a simplification, but I think A-R was also recommended because growers can report the data. The more complicated we get, the harder it is for grower to report the data. And I think, but this question also, when I looked at the question, is it appropriate? I was wondering, well, shall we continue with A-R? Or if we say, well, it's not appropriate, are we recommending no? That's not good. We should go into a different direction. And then my opinion is it is appropriate enough. There may be many approaches, some of them may be better, but now we have some experience, and I think that counts something too, that I would say, yes, it's appropriate enough to continue using A-R in combination with others like modeling, CV SWOT, or whatever may be done. That would be that's kind of my take on this question too, in addition to what was mentioned.
I do want to second what Ruth said, that if it's too complicated to figure out R right now, then we at least the growers could reply you report A.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Mike, the two of us are responsible for writing a draft. Do you think we have something to write here that may complement question one, or at one point we will see where we actually want to respond, where we want to include the response to this question. If it's more appropriate to incorporate what we write into question one, then probably we would just mention that later. But shall we try to come up with an answer for next time?
Yes.
Okay,
An
great.
easier one than other people.
Definitely, yes. I see, Sam, you raised your hand. I guess I know why.
Yes. Just want to do a quick time check. We do have to do public comment, and I know we didn't get to question 5 yet. I only have 3 people as part of the public comment queue, though. So I'm wondering if folks can stay on for just a moment. If there is time, it'd be great to at least introduce question 5. I know that the text is very long for that one, but with your okay, Daniel, maybe we can run through public comment first and then revisit question 5, just so we're kind of roughly in line with the agenda.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all, especially for spending this time on a Friday afternoon. Real quickly, public comment is included in all of these sessions. We did request in the meeting notice that you contact staff at least 48 hours in advance of this meeting if you'd like to be included in the conversation queue. I received 3 names. When I call your name out, if you could just, I'll go ahead and unmute you. Please do keep your comment to 3 minutes, 3 minutes or less. I'll be giving you prompts at 2 minutes and 30 seconds to conclude your comment, and then at 3 minutes, we will go ahead and move on to the next one. The first name that I have up in the queue is Adam Lapitz, followed by Elias Rodriguez, and then Sarah Lopez. Adam.
I don't have any comments. Thanks, Sam.
Okay, thanks so much, Adam. That was easy. Next, we'll go to Elias Rodriguez. Elias, if you could unmute.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Elias Rodriguez. I'm an attorney with California Rural Legal Assistance, and we represent community groups who are impacted by nitrate contamination. I have 3 points today. Thank you so much to the expert panel members for your deliberations. My first point is about acreage data. The public and panelists have been asking for acreage data in the Central Valley. So I urge the State Water Board to exercise its authority to collect that acreage data from the coalitions and give it to the panelists. My second point is about limits and the importance of them. AgOrder 4.0 was a 4-year process, and it had dozens of experts and occurred after 20 years. The first AgOrder was in 2004. And the Central Coast Regional Board or regional regulator determined that monitoring, reporting, and education was not going to work. And so that's why they set the limits. They were essential to ensure that growers had a goal in mind that they could comply with and knew that their competitors are also complying with. And so they are very important to protect the groundwater and drinking water resources. And my third point is about incentives. While incentives could be a good approach, we need to remember that polluting is not a right. Industries should not be incentivized to pollute. An industry can always pass along costs to the consumers, and indeed the agricultural industry does because we see it in our grocery prices. But drinking water, on the other hand, is a finite resource that everyone in California has a right to. So thank you again for your deliberations and all your work. That is the end of my public comment.
So much, Elias. Next, we'll go to Sarah Lopez. Sarah, if you could unmute.
No comments for me. Thank you.
Okay. We received 2 additional comments, first from Maddie Richards and then Kaya Rivers. Maddie, if you could.
Hello, my name is Maddie Richards. I'm the policy manager for California Coastkeeper Alliance. Thanks so much for the opportunity to comment today, and I have really appreciated listening to all the discussion. I just want to touch on a couple quick points. First, on questions 1 and 2, it's really good to hear that there's consensus among the panel on recommending an approach that ratchets down over time. On that, though, it's important that interim limits are strong enough to prevent further degradation and to make meaningful progress toward the goal of groundwater quality protection. I'm restating the need as well to recommend setting final numeric limits that ultimately work toward protecting drinking water quality. And I want to echo the comments that Elias gave on that point. I also want to highlight the importance of data transparency and to suggest that the anonymizing approach that was used for reporting data or that is being used for reporting data in the East San Joaquin order be left behind. The Central Coast has already shown how an approach can be taken that preserves transparency at the field level, and having data be available publicly is needed to create accountability and to allow members of the public to assess the sufficiency of any regulatory program to protect water supplies which do ultimately belong to the public. Thank you all again, and that will conclude my comment.
Thank you, Maddie. We'll next go to Kaya Rivers. Kaya.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Kaya Rivers, and I'm a senior policy advocate at Community Water Center. Thank you all for being able to listen on the really great discussion. I want to continue to urge the expert panel to continue on focusing to develop interim limits on the highest polluters and also developing final limits that are protective of water quality as well. I understand that some initial recommendations are looking at interim limits set at the 80th to 90th percentile. However, I do want to note that under the Central Valley process or Central Valley program, outliers are identified at the 75th percentile. So I urge the panel to, at a minimum, set interim limits at the 75th percentile or lower to ensure that we're making good progress to meeting water quality objectives in the future. Furthermore, the method that the panel uses to develop these limits should be transparent. A key factor for developing transparent limits is having access to individual growers' acreage data, as acreage data is critical to be able to identify the scale of dischargers' contributions to nitrogen discharge and developing limits which will reduce discharges from the highest contributors, like I mentioned before. The Central Coast already has this really important data publicly available, which can help us better understand how nitrogen discharges are distributed across individual growers. However, even though the Central Valley also collects this acreage data, the Central Valley does not have this acreage data publicly available, ultimately making it really hard to identify who's discharging nitrate at the largest percentile or highest percentile. So as the expert panel continues to finalize these recommendations and work on these recommendations for questions 1 and 2, I would like to remind the panel that the state cannot continue with business as usual with the Irrigated Lands Program and ultimately recommend that the program moves forward with limits. Thank you for your time and appreciate all the work that you guys are doing on this panel. Thank you.
So much, Kaya. All right, so at this point, I do want to see if there are any other members of the public interested in providing comment. If you could use the hand raise feature. Again, you can find that at the bottom of your screen. I see a hand up from Jennifer Clary. Jennifer, please.
Thank you. Oops. My name is Jennifer Clary, and apparently I can't turn on my camera. I've been working on the Central Valley Irrigated Lands Program for, I think, 17 years. It might be 20, but I'm not quite sure. So I think I really appreciate the tenor of your conversation. Just had a couple quick points. One, I'd like to support what Ruth said about focusing on A-R, actually the actual impact on groundwater, because what I would like to see from this process are recommendations that actually start to reduce nitrate discharges to groundwater, because what my goal is really is clean drinking water. So if you're going to do the 75th percentile or 80th percentile, that's great, but that's just outliers, which is what has been happening. So if you're now asking for stronger regulation of that, it's great. But it also means that most growers don't have to do anything except report. So something to think about is what Richard Smith said, which is how do we ratchet down the norm over time? The other thing I'd like to emphasize is prioritizing the biggest problem, either by area or by crop. So we don't really need to spend the same amount of time on grapes as we do on baby lettuce or corn. So is there a way that we can prioritize the worst crops, the ones that use the most fertilizer and where an error is going to have the most impact on groundwater? And also, I don't know if you were part of the group back in, 2012 or 2013, the nitrogen monitoring and assessment task force that CDFA and the Water Board did. And one thing they focused on was they talked about a lot of different factors in calculating nitrogen applied and nitrogen removed, but they also tried to simplify it to the greatest extent possible. So I know there's been some discussion of soil nitrogen content, and that was one of the factors that they decided after a lot of discussion not to prioritize, because they thought from year to year it wouldn't be a significant difference. And so if you're going to change that, that's a pretty significant thing to measure. So trying to think about what works best for the growers who have to report is something to consider. And I really appreciate your time. I could talk for a half hour, but you definitely don't need that at this time on a Friday night. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. All right, last call for any final public comments. Go ahead and use the hand raise feature. All right, seeing no more hands at this time, we will go ahead and conclude public comment. Thomas, I see your hand up, and then I want to hand it back over to Daniel.
Yeah, I had a question for Elias and Maddie and Kaya on both the acreage and the transparency. I'm looking at what numbers that we were provided from, and maybe I can share. I don't know what I'm allowed to share.
You should be able to.
Okay, let me see it. That should be showing up here. I took this from a table on the East San Joaquin that provides an anonymous member ID. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Good. Anonymous member ID. And I went into 4 reports for 2020, for 2021, for 2022, and for 2023. And I did this for 3 fields. I did it. This is all the same anonymous member ID. I found this ID in each one of these reports. And then I have another ID. It's actually the same one as well. Same report, same reports, but it was for field 10. So I have a grower, a year, and a field. And I was able to track that for 4 years. I was able to see how much they applied, how much compost they put on, how much came with irrigation water. I have the total nitrogen removed. I know I don't have the acreage here, but I get A-R, I get A over R. I have a clear view of like where it's going, how it's improving. And then when I click in these reports on the township tab, I can also see, total acreage in almonds, total acreage in pistachios. So I can identify outliers. I don't know the acreage associated with this particular field, but I can at least see whether there's outliers or not. And then I can look at the township scale and I can see, is this an important crop or not an important crop? So I'm not quite sure what we're missing, because it seems like to do a groundwater assessment at the township scale, everything is there. And that goes to the transparency question as well. Then why do we need the individual growers? Because I can certainly see if an individual grower is not very good on A-R, on A over R, over and over and over again. That would be my question. And I'm going to stop sharing if I can find where I can do that.
The red button. Tom,
where is it?
You had a question for either Elias, Maddie, or Kaya. I hate to put any of you on the spot, but just wanted to see if one of you had a very brief response for Thomas. If not, I would say that at the meeting coming up on November 19th, perhaps think through what Thomas shared and share your thoughts at that point. But I do see a hand up from Kaya, and we will stick to just one of you for now, with, of course, an opportunity to speak at a future meeting. Kaya, please.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you for your question. I think that a really important piece of data that is missing from the table that you showed us is the individual acreage data. It really shows us the impact that each grower is having, the impact that growers are having with their nitrogen discharge. Say if someone is discharging 200 pounds per acre, but they have a smaller parcel or ranch or field, compared to someone that's discharging 200 pounds per acre and they have a larger field, that discharge is much greater than what is currently being reported. And I do think that information is really important if we're trying to minimize discharges from folks that are contributing to nitrogen discharges and exceedances of the water quality objectives at a higher rate. I'm happy to talk about this more with you.
Ruth.
I have a follow-up question that I know we have only 2 minutes left, but I guess I'm clear on how the water quality coalitions are using that data, and they know the acreage, they're just not sharing it. So they know what's going on with each farm, and they're doing the follow-up with the outliers. So how are you using that data specifically for each farm? Like what's the action that's being taken, knowing that this is a large farm or a small farm for the specific operation? Or maybe it's another time we can follow up. Now we have 1 minute left.
Yeah, if I can, I know we're right at the end. Ruth, can you pose your question one more time? And I encourage those regular listeners to these calls to think through for the next meeting.
Well, obviously the acreage data isn't available to the coalition. And so what's the use for it other than understanding the patterns, I guess. I know it's like 6 o'clock on Friday night. I'm starting to fade a little bit. And probably others are too, but I just wonder, there seems like there's more to explore there about how that data is used, and specifically how the individual farm level data is used, because there's maybe a trade-off there to consider. And between the more transparent it is, the sort of can of worms is the reporting going to be as accurate the more individual farm level data is known to the public, and the more strict enforcement limits are. There's just in all regulations, there's kind of a trade-off there. So I don't know if that's the right way to end this, but that's something I'm very interested in exploring more and hearing other perspectives on.
Thank you for that, Ruth. Yeah, really appreciate everyone staying on till 6. I do want to make sure that Daniel has an opportunity for closing thoughts, and then Karen Bogus as well. But we are at the end of the session today, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Daniel, any closing thoughts, and then we'll go to Karen.
Just want to say thank you everybody who attended and contributed to today's meetings, and have a nice evening and a great weekend.
Thank you, Daniel.
I'll just echo the thanks, and thanks for sticking with us. We still have 72 people online. So again, lots of interest, and you all are exceeding my expectations, and I look forward to next week's discussion too. Have a good evening and a good weekend.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.